Hello, welcome to stream number 85 in this series where we're programming an NES game live on Twitch from scratch. Let's get started. And so in the last stream, made some awesome progress about how we're handling the palettes for the sprites, and now we have some actual game art that works properly, and we can see the ship, and that cloud flies by, and there's some enemies, and some stuff that's actually happening here that wasn't working before, and that's pretty cool. I mean, obviously some little glitches with the way that the sprite rolls over at the bottom because of the size of it, but overall, I'm pretty happy with the way that's going. It's interesting that the first flybys, I guess, something about the way they're defined, they actually have collision. And then we have the ship can explode, and so things progress pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how that's all working. We even got the background bumper thing that I had created there. That loads up correctly now, and that seemed to be just a. That just seemed to be something with the way that the image was loaded. It's expecting multiple palettes, which we don't really want, but it's just a placeholder. So I'm not overly concerned about that right now. So we're at an interesting point where we have the ability to bring more stuff in. I was thinking about, it'd be cool to do something like bring in more of the content. Like the thruster and the actual projectiles. So you have the thruster there, which has, it looks like 4 frames of animation. If we zoom in there. So, and that looks pretty cool. I'm not sure how complex or simple it is in terms of, like, if it would be something that would require, that could be, we could do some sort of horizontal flipping or something like that, but at some point, will you be doing any refactoring? So adding in logic for tiles and sprites can be done in ASM chunks instead of one large file. Yeah, so right now, that's a great question. So right now, obviously, a lot of this is being handled as this one large file, just because it was, as you do, you build code and you kind of start to get sort of daunted by how much you have in there, and say, okay, I need to organize this a little better. That's one nice thing about the fact that the drawing code is generated separately. It also lives in this separate file, so that keeps it nice and separate. For the logic for the ship and stuff like that, probably we'll do the same thing for the different types of enemies and whatnot. Right now, obviously, we're not doing that, but that's pretty... wouldn't hurt to do. But what I was saying here is I also would like to, I was thinking it'd be nice to, or really cool to bring this in, just because it would look cool, but it's not really, while it's certainly something that is fun and, adds to the enjoyment of it. I don't know how many of you saw on Twitter, I posted a picture. I actually loaded this up on my EverDrive and popped it into my front loader and played it on this little 13-inch CRT that I've got. It looks terrible by comparison to trying to play it on the AVS, and it's not crisp or clear or anything, but there's just something really satisfying about playing it on the actual hardware and really getting sort of into that full swing of the 6-year-old or the 7-year-old that me thinking about actually making an NES game. So for those of you who didn't see, just really kind of awesome to be able to get this on the sort of period correct hardware, I guess is what you would say. But obviously a lot of work to do still. One thing that was kind of interesting is you can see that the sort of subtle touches that are on the ship, the darker grays, are a little bit harder to discern. Now, the nice thing is that that sort of works to your advantage with, you know, being able to do shading that looks a little bit better for certain things than what the actual colors allow for. But yeah, is the thruster always on, or does it appear when there's a boost? I'm thinking it'll probably always be on, but I don't know. I mean, you know, we'll play around with that. We also have the bullets here, which are also animated through a rotating palette. That may potentially be challenging to, well, I don't know that we can do it through rotating the palette, only because if we use the explosion, that palette for the explosion too, then we're kind of out of palettes. Unless we do some swapping for when things explode. But I want to use probably, you know, only a handful of different explosion type animations. Just, you want to give it some variety, but you also don't want to take up a huge amount of space just for something like that. One thing to note, I had known about this for a while, but I hadn't run this. So Shiru, if you know anything about NES Homebrew, is someone who has been around in the community for a super long amount of time, and he was one of the first homebrewers that really was settled on the idea that you can use C to program NES games, at least according to my understanding of how this kind of unfolded. And he wrote this tool here that lets you look at your ROM, and it will tell you how much space you're consuming for your ROM and your char data, so you can see you know, if you're going to run out of space. So this is what we're using so far, which is actually surprisingly a lot for how little is actually going on. But that's, you know, something we can play with. There are a lot of options for mappers, especially now with things like GT-ROM and different mappers that give you a lot of availability in terms of how many banks of char data you have and stuff like that. When the explosion sprite is drawn, it could stop palette cycling. Yeah, the only problem with doing that is if you have bullets on screen, they're going to stop that effect. So, I mean, it's not a terrible, it's not a terrible thing, you know, in terms of the, the effect of that is not going to be so bad. But yeah, that's one possibility. And then the tool does also support MMC mappers in cartridges. So you're talking about the Space Checker, I assume. It does understand the different mappers and their usage. So if you go to, let's see, I had dumped a couple of games from the retro dumper. Let's see what I've got on here. I don't remember. I don't remember what I actually have on here. Oh, so like Mega Man 2, you can see it understands the mapper, and it understands how many different ROM banks it has. Now with Mega Man, I believe it's using char RAM and loading the data into the RAM, which is why you don't see any char banks in here. And let's see, Super Mario Brothers 3. And again, these are ROMs I dumped from my own games, but you can see it seems to understand the mappers pretty well. I don't know what the limitations are. I don't know how even up to date it is, but it works for the majority of the mappers, from what I understand. So it's a useful tool to see how close you are to running out of space in your in your current configuration. So just wanted to mention that because it's kind of cool. It's an interesting tool. I don't know. I actually don't know what else it can do, but we'll probably be using that as we go and add more content to the game. But what I was thinking I wanted to do is more stuff along the lines of actual gameplay functionality. And so have the ability, for example, for the scout ship to fire bullets at the player. This is more so to exercise the code that handles the rendering of the sprites and the collision detection than it is for any of the actual gameplay, because I assume that we're going to be using the same kind of gameplay, same kind of collision detection for our other for actual gameplay, but at this point, you know, it's still pretty. We're still kind of putting all of this functionality together, right? So what I want to do is I'm going to take Jordan's enemy. Well, we'll do a couple of things. Let's replace. Let's take the enemy stuff and see if we can get the enemy bullet in there. Where was that? All right, so let's grab the NES palette. And there it is. So that's the, is that right? Yep, that's right. So that's in there, and then we're going to switch over to indexed, and we're going to save as that as enemy bullet. All right, so now let's close the asset tool and do our conversion for that. All right, and that looks good. So the nice thing is that these are all kind of looking like they're coming together, or they're importing correctly. Although, see, that's interesting. I wonder. I'm still having an issue where I feel like it's misinterpreting, because like that gray color in the background, or maybe that's a bug in the way it's drawing. I can't tell. Looks like it's almost like when I do the conversion to indexed, it's swapping the color, even though that should be just transparent. If I forcefully delete the outer parts of that and save, and then convert it again, That's better. So it seems to be doing something where it's actually creating, or maybe, oh, you know, maybe it's because of the way it's grabbing it from here, and then it looks gray because of the way it gets converted over to the new palette. That's interesting. Okay, but that's good. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then same thing we do with all of our other sprites that we were doing. We just do sprite to JSON. That's going to give us our JSON file, and then we can grab that. Where is it? Enemy bullet. And this just becomes enemy 0, pal. All right, so that's good. And then we do our and everything is good there. All right, and then we want to include that in the project file. Don't need to look at that anymore, or that, or that, or that. So and we can then just do all right, so that should give us the export of everything with the enemy bullet now. Which we're not using. I just want to make sure that it is getting loaded in. Okay, so if we go to the PPU viewer, that's it. Okay. And then let's see. Can I wonder if there's a way? I can select that, but then I was hoping there'd be just a way to, that would be kind of neat, is if I could just flip through the palettes just to see what it looks like. But anyway, that's right now. So now what we need to be able to do is spawn that entity, right? So we have our code here. Maybe what we'll do is what you were saying, MDTA UK. Let's maybe start moving some stuff out of this main file. So that we have a little bit of organization to what we're doing. So we'd have player.asm. Oh, why did it save it as? Haha. Oops, that was dumb. Player.asm. Typed it in there, but then I didn't actually save it as that, which was silly. All right. All right, and then what we'll do, let's see, process player is there, and we can just take everything. This is going to be the biggest one right now, because that has the collision detection and for the player when they crash into the background. I don't remember if it's. I'll fix that in a second. I don't remember if that's the right format, but. Oh yeah, okay. I thought it was double the standard quote and not the apostrophe, but all right. So that's that, and then we can do all of these. So let's say explode.asm. To make sure before we go too far that that this did not break anything. Yep, okay, that's good. Well, you need to clear any carries and reset the X and Y values in each separated ASM. No, it's not. If I were doing something where I was calling a function or a subroutine, you'd want to make sure that you're pushing things and whatever. But just like with the drawing, I'm writing that code with the expectation that it has to understand what's happening when it's being called. So if anything, I might do something like incoming X is offset into entities for this entity, right? And that's true for all of them. The X is the index that we're using to get into this entities. So it's worth noting that we can't just change it, because if we do, that's gonna break the rest of the game processing loop, right? Versus if you do JSR, which we don't do too many of. So let's see. So we do that for the load palette. For that, I'm pushing A and Y and X, so that because we use those, we don't want that to impact the calling code, so they get pushed onto the stack. Param 1 and 2 come in from the external caller, and then I believe it modifies all of these, although these should not be actually changed coming out. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, so it's like the C preprocessor. It's just kind of copying and pasting the code in. So it's a good way to organize, but it doesn't actually have an impact on your code performance, because on the NES, just because it's a slow CPU, doing the JSR is pretty slow, and you should avoid it unless you actually need it. Although, I mean, you could argue that it's one of those things where you could use it until it became a problem and then start inlining things, but I'm not sure that we're not going to need it. Like, I'm not sure that we're gaining anything by calling it as a subroutine and then having to refactor out into an inline when it's not that hard to inline it. About the only weird things that we're dealing with are, for these out of range jumps, because of the amount of code, we have to do the short jump and then the long jump to get past that. So let's include cloud.asm, and then we can do our same something here. How would that affect multiple prog banks? Well, so if you're using multiple prog banks is tricky because you have to have your code that you're calling. There are a couple of things. One is that you either have to have the code that you're calling in the fixed bank, so that when you call it, it hasn't moved, so that you don't have to worry about it. So, like, just to give you an example, if you have multiple prog banks, right? If you're calling something that's in one of these banks and you're switching between them, so let's say you're calling a function that resides in this bank and they're all interchangeable, and then you're in this code. So you're in this code and it switches the prog bank, and now you're over to this prog bank and you want to access that same function. It's not there anymore. And so now the problem is that you have to include it. You have to include 3 copies, right? Or however many copies you have in the prog bank. The other thing you can do is you just keep those those procedures that you're using in the fixed bank, so that you don't have to worry about keeping as many, that many copies around. So there are a couple options there, and I'm not overly worried about them right now, just because we're kind of far away from that yet. There are ways to address it, and the level of complexity. I mean, you can do things like in your code, you always jump to a memory location that jumps to the actual position of the function. So your jump itself is consistent, but when you switch your prog bank, you have to reset the address that it's pointing to for that function. It's potentially very messy. Again, not something that I'm super worried about right now. We'll probably have to deal with it at some point, but we can hold off on that as long as possible. Let's see if I reload the ROM here. Hopefully nothing is broken from, everything is looking, nothing should have broken from that change. It's kind of interesting that you can't shoot those guys for some reason. But you can shoot these guys. That's a 3 times speed, and it's not because the game is running slow. It's just because everything is running at a slower speed. Probably want to speed up the way the bullets process, but that's not super important right now. All right. Let's see. This is just a flyby. All right, so that's that, and we have our ASM all moved out. So you can see that kind of made it a lot cleaner in terms of how all the logic that's handling that stuff is processed. Now probably what we want to do, well, there are a few things, right? So we need to handle the enemy bullet in terms of it actually doing something. And that should be the entity type as defined in, so that gets exported by the tool automatically. It just keeps track of what the entity types are, and also our draw code we'll have the entity for, or we'll have the code for the enemy bullet in there too. So all of that is pretty cool because I didn't have to write that. That just happened as part of the export process, which is excellent. So branch if equal to enemy bullet. So I'm just going to assume that it probably needs a short, the long jump here. And then we can start doing that here. We can say process enemy bullet. All right, so if you take a look at all of our other code, one of the common things they all do is they jump to entity complete when they're done. In fact, we can probably just steal the player bullet code and do it in reverse, right? Just to start off with. All right, so, but instead of doing a subtract, we're going to do an add, right? Because we're moving down the screen instead of up the screen. So clear carry, add carry 2. And then, so we have this check bullet collision, which checks against the enemies. So let's take a look at that. Check bullet collision. Let's do this. Let's move this guy out too, because this is an actual subroutine we're calling. This one I had made a subroutine because I really wanted it to be completely discrete from the rest of the code in terms of, you know, the dependencies and whatnot. That may have to get moved out depending on how often we call that and how inefficient this code is, but it'll be good enough for now. All right, so okay, cool. All right, so we've got our check bullet collision code moved into here. Oh, you know what? The reason that this is... Okay, the reason that it's not checking against the medium is because it's only checking for scout. So that should make those get destroyed by the player bullet now. Curious about the bounding box that's being used. Is it not using bounding box left, clear carry, add carry 8? Oh, okay, so it's not actually adding store A bounding right. Okay, so it's only using an 8x8 hard-coded bounding box. Okay. Yeah, the idea is that there's going to be sort of changes in the speed of the background to indicate that you're higher or lower above the background. That's going to be part of the game mechanic in terms of how what the challenge of that part of the level is. All right, so let's see what we've got here. So we've got enemy bullet that's going to call process enemy bullet, and we've got enemy bullet here. We don't have anything that's spawning enemy bullets. And then this check is actually not useful because oh, you know, that's interesting. I didn't realize I had done that. So for the cloud, I think I had just manually set the type to 0. What we can do is clear entity is what it's called. I forgot about that. We can because that's a consistent way of handling that. And if we go to where are my scripts? Script window. So we've got these entities loaded in memory right now. Should still handle it the same way. Yep, alright, it went away. Good. Okay. So going back to the enemy bullet, we don't have anything that is branch carry set. Right, okay, because it is checking to see if the carry is still set if we do the subtraction. So if the carry is clear, that's when we want to do it. So basically we're heading up the screen, right? And we're heading down the screen in a straight line. And we have our bullet moving down, which means the Y is increasing, right? Y is getting bigger. And so we want to just keep adding to it. And if we hit the bottom, which means that the, well, it would be 240, but let's just go all the way to 255. If we hit 255 and roll over, the carry is going to be set because we overflowed, and then that'll be our clue that we should get rid of the enemy bullet. But we'll again, that should actually check. I guess we could check directly. Nah, I don't care right now about that. Alright, so flybys are technically the only actual code logic that we have. All of those other enemies are being handled in the same way. So what we should do... What is this doing? So it's using data as a counter. Okay, so it's not... I see. So what it's doing, and I'll stop this in a second. I'll stop this here so you can see the difference. What it's doing is it's counting... It's got an internal counter to adjust the speed of the flyby and the scout ship and the medium ship. So instead of advancing every frame, it's advancing every few frames to make it look a little bit slower. But I actually think I want to keep it at that faster speed just because it doesn't look too bad. And I think we got to fix the problem with the enemies going too far down. What am I checking against? FE. Yeah, so these are 16, so 240 minus 16, decimal 240 minus 16, do E0. see if that fixes that little visual glitch there. Yeah, so they didn't pop around to the top again anymore, so that's good. All right, so let's make them fire a bullet at the player. And how are we going to do that? How are we going to determine when they should fire? I mean, the simplest way, since we're not using data anymore to do this counter for the player, or sorry, for the advance of the enemy on screen, we could use that for when we fire a bullet. Like we could say, okay, fire a bullet every, I don't know, let's say every half second we're going to have it fire a bullet. So branch not equal to, let's just go to the next nameless, we'll do an anonymous label there, fire a enemy bullet, right? And so what it then needs to do, let's see how, I think when I'm add map object, entity type X position. Okay, cool. So JSR add map object. So we are taking param1 is a variable that we have. We're going to set it to the entity type. So load a entity type enemy bullet, store a into param1, load a, the X position, which is the X position of this entity. X, stop it. Store that into param2, right? Yep. And then we're going to call add map object, so that will spawn a bullet for the enemy, and this is just going to make it literally just shoot down the screen. It's dumb. It's not going to hit the player ever, or very unlikely. And obviously we're going to want to do things where, based on the player's position on the screen, we would do something like, okay, here's the screen, here's the enemy position, here's the player position. The enemy should, either fire in the direction of the player, or the other thing that you get a lot in shooters is you get, a pattern of spray of bullets that happen as the ship is moving, with the possibility of, you have two of them at the same time doing that same thing, so you have to maneuver to avoid that spray pattern. Right now, just want to get the simple case working, and then we can start getting fancy with how they're actually going to fire. And actually, I want to turn on that script for looking at the entity types to see what we actually end up with in our memory here when so that didn't actually do anything. Why? Did I remove the increase? Increment entity data, load a data, compare 20, branch not equal to this thing, otherwise load a 0 stored in data. Oh, because I'm resetting it every frame. That's why. I didn't see that part. Okay, that's easy enough to fix. Alright, so it's adding, not adding enemy bullet like it's supposed to. It's adding load to entity type store, param1, xpos, param2, JSR add map object, entity type, exposition, go through. I mean, the other thing is it's probably adding too many. Let's do it a little bit more sparingly just to start off with. So it runs at 60 frames per second. Hopefully, if all goes well, so 3C. So just do it once a second. Still interested in knowing why it was adding those medium ships. That was kind of weird that that's what it's adding. Oh, also this should be really in the main game code, and or at least if nothing else, not part of subcode. Let's see what we got here. So let's look at this for a second, because this is strange that it's adding add map object, shooter. Not yet another great thing about about Messin. Sour is the person who makes Messin. But one of the great things about it is it actually understands that all of these files are separate things, which is pretty excellent. Alright, so let's see what's going on here and why it's behaving this way. You know, the only thing I can think of is that it's possible that at the time that we're calling add map object, something else is well, but it's not, it wouldn't be done from the NMI, so shouldn't be in the middle of doing this. So param1 and param2 should be okay. Let's I'm going to restart. Excuse me. So param1 and param2 are what we are looking at in terms of what we're adding to the it says param1 and param2, but it's actually using T1 and T2. Well, that is just dumb. That's just bad comments on my part. I guess I must have changed it at some point because I thought maybe it was conflicting with something. Or, oh, maybe, you know what, it might be that when we were writing the collision or the, yeah, it might be when we were writing the collision stuff, I needed param1 and param2. Can NES generate sine wave values in code? Yeah, thanks, Banchaku. You're exactly you said what I was going to say. So, for those of you not seeing the chat right now, you do look up tables for sine, cosine, tangent. Computing those at runtime is pretty expensive, and so you pre-generate your lookup table of sine and cosine values for use in your game, or actually you use sine and then you can reuse sine offset by 90 degrees for cosine, and then if you need a tangent for some reason, you pre-generate that too. And that's true not only of the NES, but even early PCs. I mean, I have a book that talked about DOS programming, you know, on 46s that said the same thing, that you don't use the built-in sine and cosine functionality, you use lookup tables because it's way faster than computing it every time. So, alright, so now let's go here and let's fix our code. So it should be T1 and T2, not param1 and param2 like I thought. And that explains why it keeps respawning the medium ship. It's because that's what's being respawned by the prior call, which is the map functionality that's looking at the map data, and it understands, you know, it sees that it's a medium ship that needs to be loaded, but meanwhile, that's not what we're trying to do once the ship is actually loaded. Whoa, okay, so it did actually, I did see something happen there. Okay, so it is, oh, that's interesting. So it's not, right, the Y position is not taken into account, but okay, it is firing every second now. All right, let me, I don't know why I found that as funny as I did, but let's fix that. So we probably want to be able to pass the Y position as well. So let's now the problem with that is in places where we're not calling it, or where we're calling this already, we need to have it pass past that where the value is 0 for the Y. Let's do this right here. Let's load a 0, store a T3. We don't spawn at the top of the screen, right? I think that's probably the only place we're calling it here, which is good because it means it's simple to change. And then here, that is actually passing that now. So let's make this and check. Oh. It doesn't help if you don't do anything with it. I'm reading the chat and I got distracted. Not that you guys shouldn't chat. I was not thinking about it carefully. So now that's loading at this, so this should be this instead. Okay. All right, let's try that again. Now that should work. So that's the player firing, and now the enemies should also. There they go. And then what we can do is we can make it so that, let's do something where now if the enemy bullet hits you, you also crash. Oh, they're all firing. Whoa, that was some intense slowdown, it looked like. That worries me a little bit since there's not a whole lot. Oh. That's weird. Yeah, the chat, you purposely chat to insert a bugs in my code. Don't worry, I don't need any help. Thanks. All right, so is that saying that the value of that last one is minus 9,000? What is that? 9 million? What are you reading here? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate these just so that we can see. Okay, that's better. Minus 94. Minus 94. Why? I mean, I assume that all has to do with the call to the map object being added. Reset that. Then increment the Y position. Process this by loading and comparing and branching if not equal to entity complete, otherwise clear entity. Jump entity complete. Which it doesn't need to really do, it can fall through, but I don't know, that's weird. I'm not 100% sure if it's going to be a one-hit death. I think at least to start, yes. And there may be power-ups that you can get that will, you know, extend it so you can have 2 hits. But we'll see. Alright, there wasn't any slowdown. I was just imagining it, or it seemed like maybe messing. I don't know. I'm not sure what happened there. But I still don't know. If I bring up my script window, it's still going to have those weird extra... Oh, it didn't have it this time? Really? Oh, and I blew up. I wonder why that went away. trying to spam it to see if having too many entities does seem to... you can't really tap fast enough to fill up the entity list. Does seem to slow it down a little bit. But anyway. How do you mean try with multiple enemies at the same time? Like adding more entities and firing the weapon? Oh, I gotta turn this on. There's an obvious problem where it allows you to fire too many bullets, and so you potentially have the opportunity where, or the ability where it will run out of slots for these entities. And you can see right there, it didn't spawn all the enemies that it should have, because it ran out of entity spots. I mean, it could very well be the place with the 4 bad guys that's causing the problem. Although I messed it up that time because I was firing, so there weren't enough spots for it to actually spawn all 4 of them. So let's go back here. I don't know. That's weird. It's not happening anymore. Hold on a second. Is that the highest it goes? I got a little space heater for down here. The remote is kind of crappy. It doesn't work. Oh, okay. There we go. Because it's cold down here in the basement. Yeah, so exactly. There should be a a maximum number that it allows you to spawn, but obviously that is not in place right now. And yeah, there could be a power up that would allow more, but it's, again, you know, so early in everything. I'm not overly concerned with those kinds of things right now. It was just kind of fun messing around with it. So, all right, so now we know that they spawn bullets, and they are spawning them in a straight direction. So now what we would want to do is let's see, we could do the approach that I was talking about, where we would say, all right, you know, have it fire them. The other thing is, actually, before we go that far, the Y position isn't really the right spot. What we really want to do is we want to add 16 to that, so that it's at the base of the enemy ship, so that it actually looks like it's firing from the front, not like it's popping out of the back of it. Oh, really? What did I do? Clear carry, Y position. Clear carry, add carry, store in T3, load A. Why are they all... Why... That's strange. Why are they firing from further up when they should be firing from that's the sprite's Y position. Is it because... Oh. Sorry. Yeah. Why is it in some weird place? Because I am adding not 16 like I thought, but way more. 100, was that 128? There we go. It's hard to read the text because of compression, but it looks like you're adding F0, which is 240. Yeah, no, that was an accident. Let me increase the size of the text. Sorry about that, because this is... full screen, zoom in. Oh, whoa. Certainly makes everything bigger, but I don't necessarily want everything to be bigger. I just want the text here to be bigger. Header layout, appearance, toggle zen mode, centered, layout, zoom in. I'm still learning how to use Visual Studio Code for more than just the basics. So you'll have to bear with me a second here. There we go. That's actually, I think, too big. Is that better? Can you actually read that now? Okay, cool. I also know that people are watching it on phones sometimes, and so that can be problematic for when they're looking at it. If it's too small, then looking at it on a phone makes it impossible to read. So, actually, what was the size of it when I was on Sublime Text? Yeah, that was about the same, maybe a little bit bigger, but there's less going on the window here. So, all right. All right, so now we're adding the enemy bullet, and it's just processing in a straight line down the screen. What I'd like to be able to do is have it handle something like this that we talked about, right? Where you have the ability to now not just have it do a straight line down, which is the easiest case, but have it either do a pattern or fire directly at the player, which is generally not that useful because the player moves that, you know, unless it's really fast, by the time the bullet reaches where the player is probably not there anymore. So the question now is, how do we add this map object in such a way that we have the ability to know which one it was that was added, and then adjust the angle at which it's flying. So what I think we could do, we compare it to 3C, and then we don't reset data, so it's just going to fire 1. Actually, well, yeah, let's do that. We'll do that right at the beginning. And then what we'll do is we will store T1, T2, and T3 so that it places the bullet spray at the bottom of the ship. But we're going to do this. We're going to do this 3 times, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify. I guess I close that. There it is. I'm going to modify add map object to return the value of x in T1. So store x into T1. And the reason that we want that should become clear in a second here, hopefully. So in this case, we add that. We don't care that T1 is modified, so that's fine. So for the flyby, what I want to do, let's just start with the simplest case, which is that we'll make the flyby fire 3 shots. So after we fire the initial one, we need to call 2 more times. Now T1 has the entity every time we call it that was added. And so what we can do is we can set the data value to something that will determine how the enemy bullet is processed differently. So what we can do is we can say load A. Let's just do simple things here. We can make it more advanced as we go. Entities plus entity y. Oh, you know what we need to do though? We need to transfer x to A, and then push A, because we want to save off x for when we're done. So load A0, store A in okay, just wanted to make sure that I didn't break this. So it's data, and then that's x. And then we're gonna, so we've put that in that value, pull A, transfer A to X. Well, that's actually when we're done, sorry. We're just pushing it onto the stack until we're done with what we're doing here. So we add the first object. We can actually do this at the beginning, so that it's not interrupting this flow of code. Add the map object, load A0, store it in data X, then add the next map object, but before we do that, we gotta do load X T1. Is that a thing? Okay, sorry, I forget sometimes. So load x T1, load A0, store A, entities plus entity, data X. Then we do the same thing here, except we do that with 1. And then same thing here. We do this with 2. And what that actually, the 0, 1, and 2 are doing will hopefully become clear in a second. Then we're going to pull A off the stack and transfer A to X because we're done doing this. The other thing we want to do is increment the value of data so that we don't call this again. So this is going to be a single, like, spray and you're done. Yeah, get the original X back for processing other entities. So just make sure we don't add bullets again. Okay, so that should do that. So here we have 3, and then what we want to do is we're going to do a couple of different, we're going to do different things depending on the value of data. So we're going to load a branch of equal, which means it's 0 to enemy bullet left. Compare it to 1, branch of equal to enemy, enemy, I can't spell, enemy bullet left, enemy bullet straight, and then compare, well, and then there's only one other thing left, which is enemy bullet right, which we'll add the label for, but we don't technically need. Enemy bullet left, jump, enemy bullet done, and then this is enemy bullet straight. So here we're going to add Y to all of them. We're actually going to move this all here. We're going to add Y to all of them, and then depending on the data value, we will either add X or no X. Let's see. So enemy bullet right, we're going to load A. To the right, we can just increment. To the left, we can just decrement. And straight, we don't do anything. And obviously, this is not correct because it will wrap around, but I don't care about that right now. Player bullet 11, jump, clear, ND. What? Badge carry set. Sorry, there's just a problem with an out-of-range jump. 。  . 。 . 。 . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . . I'm confused. Okay, that's not actually the problem. I thought that 11 meant it's line 11, but that is not the case. Where else are we doing branching? Enemy bullet done, enemy bullet done, enemy bullet done, branch of equal to enemy bullet straight, enemy bullet left, jump clear, branch carry set to that. What are you talking about? Player, oh, player bullet. Player bullet. I'm thinking it's the enemy bullet, but I'm looking at the wrong thing. Branch carry set, so branch carry clear to here. Otherwise, jump to enemy complete. Alright, so now it's going to spray bullets in 3 directions, and they're going to wrap around until they hit the bottom of the screen. That's okay. The point is to prove out that the idea of how this should work actually works. And it doesn't. Did I... It's probably adding them, but they're probably not also doing... $27 and $36. What on earth are you talking about? Oh. And it's funny because I was thinking about this. When I was implementing it and talking about what I was doing, and I said to myself, I have to remember to reset T1 not to have the index, but to actually have the entity type that we're trying to create, and then I forgot. Let's go to this again. Okay, so we are getting bullets, they are just not doing anything different. So let's look at why. I'm sure it's just something silly that I messed up. So store A, so wait. Load XT1, load A0, and then add map object, and then load X with T1 again, and then load that into data. That looks okay. Increment X position. Load A entity data X. Branch if equal to enemy bullet left. Compare to 1. Enemy bullet straight, which doesn't do anything, and then otherwise it's enemy bullet right, in which case we are incrementing the X position, otherwise we're decrementing the X position. This is adding, oh, right. We don't want to do that. Just yet. Let's see, so store A in the Y position. If we added with the carry and the carry is set, then we want to clear it. Otherwise, we want to jump to process. We don't even have to. We can do this. Branch carry clear. branch carry set to clear entity. No. Sorry. I'm confusing myself here. Carry clear should go to here. That should go to there. And this should jump to entity complete. There we go. That's what I didn't do right. And then that will process this and then go to entity complete. So let's make and restart and rerun that. And let's take a look. There we go. So I think what I want to do is maybe change it so that they're not waiting a full frame before firing them off like that. Now we're going to get lots of bullets. All right. So let's do this. So let's maybe make it just a moment. Give the player a moment to see that the ship has entered the screen. So you figure a quarter of a frame is 15. And then, like I said, we're still seeing that weird behavior where it's wrapping the X value because we are going past the bounds of the screen when we are adding the X and Y. That's pretty cool. I'm actually reasonably happy with how that looks right now. Let's do... Then we can actually look at the sprites in real time too. See what our sprite utilization looks like. Now, wow, that's pretty cool. You will notice that one of the things we're seeing is that the redraw, as sprites are overlapping, we're getting too many sprites on a line, and so that 8 limit is causing some of them to be partially drawn. So this is where we would want to do something like change the order of the hardware sprites so that we get flicker on the screen. I think I remember some of the folks over on NESDev talking about that they just basically rotate around how they load the DMA memory in their NMI. So in the NMI code, when we are loading stuff up right now, we're just taking our code from the 200 range and jamming that into the PPU. Now, that memory is set by it's set by the draw entities code, and that is just starting from, I think it's just starting from the beginning. I think it's just taking, let's take a look because I don't remember exactly, but I think that's right. So we're setting things up that X is, yeah, so X is our code. X is our code, X is our index into the entities, and let's see, where are we? And then Y is our index into the sprite memory. So what we can do, let me think about this a little bit. So we know we can do a simple quick modulo by doing an AND, a bitwise AND on the value. It's 64 is the maximum number of hardware sprites, and so we could have a counter. I think this is what I want to do. I'm going to have I'll let me explain it first, and then I'll implement it. Instead of trying to do both at the same time, because I think I'll mess it up. I might mess it up anyway, but I'll definitely mess it up if I try to do it while I'm trying to explain it. So normally the game is just taking. We have a section of memory that has all the OAM data, and it's just telling the PPU, hey, go populate your OAM data. With the data from the CPU starting from the very beginning, right? And the memory that gets populated here gets populated by that code in draw entities, and it always starts at 0, which means that once we have more than 8 sprites on the line, anything beyond that will not get drawn. Now, a way to handle that is that you're just shifting the position in this memory that you're starting with every time, so that different hardware sprites are used. You're essentially rotating around through them every time. So what I need to do is have something that just keeps track of where we're starting. So I'm going to have something called DMA start. And we're going to initialize that. Actually, you know what? We can do that. Right in our initialization code, just force it to be 0. Even though technically it should already be 0. Let's wait for vblank. Where is my label? Okay. But that's not where I want to do it anyway. So draw entities. So in that code, what I want to do is I want to load Y with the DMA start. I want to increment DMA start. Well, I want to load increment DMA start, load A with that value, and it with, what was the value I was looking at? 3F, which is 63, which will roll it back over to 0 if we get past 63, and then we're going to store that back into DMA start. Okay. And then for draw entities, and we'll put this into the, we got to put this into the, what's it called? The asset tool for the code that it generates, but we want to transfer y to a, and it with 3f, and then transfer a back to y. Make sure the y value rolls over for our sprite flicker. All right, so that, I think, will take care of that for us. Well, it's certainly flickering. That was not the intended effect there. Wow, okay. Oh, damn it. I didn't account for this part of it. Every time we increment y, we have to do this check, which is crappy. It's gonna be a problem. Well, here's what we'll do. Well, let's try this. Just to see if this actually works conceptually, and then... Yuck, this is gross. Because what we're saying is we want to change increment y to increment y. What we're saying is we're going to do this, transfer a to y, and it with 3f, and then transfer back, sorry, 2ia, because I don't think there is a bitwise on anything but a. Right? You can, oh, you can AND, yeah, you can AND values against a. So that means that every time we increment y, we have to do this, is what it sounds like. Which seems crappy. Let's do this. Before we get into making this change, I will implement it in the asset tool. But let's make sure that if I do it right for the player and the cloud, this just seems like a really wasteful thing to do, and I wasn't. Yeah, I'm not set on doing it this way. Should I just have a variable that has the value of y, and then we just keep transferring that to a and ANDing it, and then I think that's what we're gonna have to do. I don't like that, but I don't know that I have another option at the moment that's less bad. So let's see. So we load y_dma start, and then we're also going to store y into dma current, and then we're going to increment dma start, wait a minute. Okay, that would be okay, because only when we increment it we have to worry about it being invalid. So that's that, and then we go into draw entities, and then what we want to do, it's still not great, but it's, I think, less bad potentially, is when we increment Y, we load A with DMA current. Well, so we increment DMA current, load it, and then store it and transfer it. That doesn't seem better. Because what the problem is that we're running out of hardware. If we do it without changing, rolling over the value of Y, we effectively start going into memory that's not part of the DMA, right? We start going into other memory, because we've started at, let's say we start with the best, easiest scenario of we have one sprite. Eventually, we're going to cycle through all 64 hardware sprites, and then we will get to a point where we will then get to 65, which should go back to 0, which again, you can use the AND to force it to stay within that range of 0 to 63. But because we can only do the AND on the A, that means we have to transfer A. I guess this is the best option because it at least is all in register, which is going to be our fastest way to handle this. It's just a lot of swapping back and forth. Where's the asset tool? I'm not going to do this by hand. We'll just re-export this with draw entities only getting updated. And Banchaku, you are correct that if we ran out of hardware sprites and we needed more, we could then alternatively have additional entities drawn every other frame, giving that further flicker. I don't know that we're there yet, but that is a good point to bring up for future implementation details. Draw entities.inc. All right, so where is our increment of Y? It is here. So we were going to add. So we're incrementing Y. We're transferring Y to A. Then we are ANDing 3F, and then we are transferring it back to Y. This is this. And let's go re-export that. All right, so let's grab that from the exported folder. It's the only thing I need to update. didn't update in the editor. Or did I just make a mistake in... No, there it is. Okay. Oh, I don't like that, but okay, let's see. Let's see if this at least works before I start complaining about performance too much. No, this is still screwed up. What did I break? And the player seems to be drawing correctly, but it's all, or not correctly, like it's tracking mostly what you would expect, but it's very, very bizarre. Why did I, what did I do wrong? Load Y DMA start, which should be 0, then store Y into DMA current. Increment DMA start, and then load... Well, I guess if I'm going to do that, I should just load it. Clear carry, add... Stop it. Clear carry, add carry, 1. Then end it with 3F. Store it, and then we're going to take load A, 0, sprite mem, 02. Okay, that's fine. X is 0, DMA start is that. Okay, and then draw entities. That's using Y to start off with. There's... I'm trying to think if there's anything. We're comparing X there. Incrementing Y. Oh, it's not doing it everywhere. Did I miss one? I did. I missed a bunch. All right. I missed some spots. That could have something to do with it, but we'll see. Let's grab draw entities again. Replace it. All right, now it's doing it everywhere. And then restart that. It's weird. It's like somehow I feel like I'm just what I'm seeing here is basically just showing me, I think, that I'm overrunning the buffer somehow and corrupting the entity's memory. Which is why we're getting this weird behavior. Let's see. Yeah, so all of that stuff in there is complete garbage. That should not be happening. That's why we're getting all of that behavior. But why is it happening? What is going on with Y that's causing this? Y was set to 0 before. Let's consult. Pretty sure it was just setting it to 0 every time. Oh yeah, that's definitely what's going on. It's definitely writing it into the entity memory, which wasn't happening before. And I think sprite mem and the entities. Let's see. Oops. Oh, damn it, I probably just closed that. Thought it was just a pop-up. Sprite mem has an address in it. I just closed source tree. Right, so I'm doing that. I'm not sure how the call to one is messing with the other. DMA start gets loaded into Y. Then we're storing Y into DMA current. Oh, which we don't really even need. We're loading Y with that. And then we're loading it into A. We're clearing the carry. We're adding 1. And then we're ANDing. And then we're storing it back into DMA start. Now, so Y has our starting position of 0 the first time through for what is sprite mem, which is our address at 0200. So coming into here, each time we go into here, we're loading A with something different, so it's not like it should be okay. I'm confused about the source of all these additional entity updates at the moment. It's probably just let's do this. Memory tools. I'm going to restart it, and basically I'm going to say, okay, wherever the entities are, which I think are here, when we get to the one that's updating the value to 7 for that sprite, for that entity. So we got 3 for the player and 4 for the cloud, and then how many bytes is the entities? Let's see. 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. So starting here, we have, that's 1 sprite with the type being at what location? 987 7. No. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6. Okay, that's what I thought, but I want to make sure. 6, 7, 8. It's 8, 2, 4, 6. 6, 7, 8, 9. It is 9 total bytes, but okay. So that's 6. So it's right up to here. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's the cloud with this. 7, 8, 9, and then. So okay, I just wanted to make sure. I was pretty sure that that was the address that I wanted to watch. Why did that not do a breakpoint? Oh, because I added a watch, not a breakpoint. Edit breakpoint. I want to, if it's written to I don't care about execution. So it's going to get written to initially when we start the game, obviously, and then when we initialize the memory, all right, so add object entity, add object loop, add map object, check objects. Oh. What? Is it that early on? I don't even remember. It's possible, I guess, that it's adding it there, but then I don't understand why. Yeah, I guess it's possible that it's that early on in the map. But what is all of the rest of this nonsense that's showing up? Let's add a breakpoint there. Can we? Oh, I'm in check bullet collision. Let's go into draw entities, which happens every frame. And I just want to step through. You're going to run. Help. Debug. PPU viewer. So there's a 3, a 4, and a 7. So that's the ship. Oh, this is part of the loop, though. Where's the code that's calling that? I don't need to loop through all of this. Draw entities. Include. DMA start. Load Y DMA start here. Okay. All right. So, like, what are all of those? Why are all of those cloud pieces messed up? So the flickering is because the hardware sprites are not getting the data consistently, is what it looks like. Is that because it's taking too long to update the NMI data, the DMA data in the loop with draw entities now? Like, is draw entities the problem, that it's taking too long to complete, and so we're running out of time? So what I want to do, F2A8, I can get rid of these breakpoints and just have, so the event viewer can show me marked breakpoints on it, and then I should be able to see in theory where that's occurring. If I can actually do anything here. So, oh, that's why. I didn't actually mark it. It's happening over there somewhere, it looks like. Yeah, that does potentially point at that being the... Well, it shouldn't matter because it's happening... It may actually be happening at the beginning of the frame and not the end and rolling over. I'm trying to think of... Why else? Why isn't it continuing on past that? Sprite index. Like, it should be just rotating all the way down. Not that much is actually done in the NMI. At the end of the day, the NMI is just setting up the DMA copy of the stuff that's already been processed. So there's a game, there's after the game loop processes, it's populating memory for the DMA that eventually happens in the NMI. I moved most of the code out of the NMI. But what I don't understand is, like, I see, for example, the ship is not rotating around 100%. Like, it should be populating its way down the PPU sprite list. But that's not what I'm seeing. Let's see. Is it possible that I just missed some more locations where I'm doing the Y increment? Yeah, it does seem to be some sort of bug in the index. Increment Y, transfer Y to A, and it with 3F, and then transfer A back to Y. That's the code. Increment Y, transfer Y to A, and A with 3F, transfer A back to Y. Just trying to see if there are any spots where I missed it. It doesn't look like it. Should be able to, let's see. Don't need 3 PPU viewers open, or 4 even. 1 will be sufficient. I keep doing that. What I'm wondering about is if I go into this and I look at the value of Y. So the value of Y should never be greater than 63 here, which is 3F. Can I set a breakpoint on that? Doesn't look like it. I can choose the different RAMs. I guess I'm just going to have to kind of... Well, actually, you know what? One thing we can check before I go through the painful process of trying to just run this through for everything is, let's take a look at what DMA start looks like a few times through. It's going to get loaded into Y, so we'll do it here. Can even, well, that should be fine. There's 3F. All right, so that's that, and then if we increment, we should get 0, and then DMA start becomes that. So now the next time around, Y is 0, so that's good. Let's do let's see, what do I want to check? I want to check to see if DMA start is greater than 3F 62. Is that? I didn't think that would work. Where's DMA start? That's at 9C. 9C. Add edit breakpoint, specific 9C, on write condition. How do you make that? Okay, so I can do 9C equals 63. And so when we come back around the next time, it should break. Okay. So now let's watch what it does with Y. So we're going to start with sprite mem at 3F. And sprite mem is at value, well, that's at 0200 is where that lives. So that's the sprite mem, and we're gonna start. It's gonna start with over here, further down. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I know what the problem is. It's because the memory is the map of the OAM data, which, yes, the index, there are 64 of them, but the index is not 64. It's, the index goes as high as, what does it go up to? It's times 4 bytes, right? It's 63 times 4 bytes, which is 252. So what we really need to be doing, so the first thing is, right, the first problem is we're not starting in the right location, even though the DMA start looked right. What we need to do is load a DMA start. And then shift left twice, because each OAM entry has 4 bytes to it, right? Let me just make sure that I'm not messing that up, but I'm pretty sure that's right. Wiki key. Yep, 4 bytes. So that's the first problem. We're not indexing in far enough when we get DMA start. So we got to take that, shift it left twice, and then we transfer that to Y. And then we want to load it again, clear it, add it, and it, store it, so that we're only going 0 through 63. However, I mean, at that point, we're back to the DMA counter that I was using. Just, well, we could increment by 4, I guess, every time, and update Y that way. No. Sorry. So the problem is I'm thinking about it as an index of an index of like a struct, which it sort of is, right? It's a structured bit of memory. I have all these extra windows open here, but when we're actually updating the memory to it in when we're actually updating the memory to it in that sprite mem buffer, it's just raw memory, right? It's just the 4 bytes. And so what we're doing here is we are incrementing Y for each of those 4 bytes, and then we are oh, you know what? Okay, but that actually simplifies things a little bit. We're incrementing Y, and then we're setting each of the bytes for the OAM position. The reason I thought we had to do this check for every instance of Y is because, like I said, I thought it was the indexed struct, but it's not. But that then is an interesting change of some things, because what we can do, we don't need to make this change for every time we increment Y, because we know that if we're dealing with one physical sprite, there's definitely the 4 bytes of memory. So let's get that back to normal. Where things get a little weird is that for every physical sprite we are updating, we have the potential that we're going to wrap around, right? Because after the 4 bytes of OAM data get updated in our buffer, that eventually gets copied over, we then have to determine, okay, do we need to go to the next position in our memory, or do we need to go back to the beginning of the buffer? And to do that, we need some sort of counter of what sprite we're at based on. So my original idea of having a specific counter wasn't horrible. It was just because of the way I was doing this, it didn't make sense, and it seemed awful, and it was. This is less awful. DMA counter. So we load A, and then we store it into DMA counter, and then we shift and put that into Y, and then we load it again and roll it over for the next time around. And then in draw entities, which we've got to get we got to re-export the original version and just grab that for the sake of starting with something that we know is actually reasonable. See, I told you I was going to mess this up. It was just a matter of how I was going to mess it up. So now what we're going to do is, so right now we have for all of these things, like if you draw a player sprite, you can see that it's organized into these chunks of text, right? And it's incrementing y 4 times. That's because that's one hardware sprite, right? So we're updating that memory for that one hardware sprite, and then we're moving on to the next one. What we need to do is we need to say, okay, for each of those, we need to increment the DMA counter and then, let's see, so we're going to increment the DMA counter and then we're going to load it into A. We're going to AND it against 3F to roll it over back to 0 if we need to. And then we're going to do a couple things. First we're going to store it back in. And then we're going to shift left twice and transfer A to Y. So we're going to increment our DMA counter saying we're going to the next sprite. We're going to then load the value and AND it, so we roll it over. We do our modulo so that if it goes past 63, it goes back to 0. We're going to store it back into the DMA counter in memory, right? The actual location in memory, in case we did roll over. Let me think about that. Do we want to do that in this way? 0. Yeah. Okay. So then we will have whatever the current DMA location is that we want. Then we're going to multiply by 4 because each of those locations takes 4 bytes, and then we put that into Y because that needs to be the new value for Y. I think that is the simplest way to make that work. So if we re-export that now, at the end of our loop, we should see that code appear. Oh, except that I didn't put new lines, but okay, for every sprite, every hardware sprite, we're doing that, but that's fine. So new line. All right, let's try again. I'm not crazy with the fact that it's it doesn't have a space between, but that's okay. We'll if this works, we'll fix that next. All right, so let's relaunch the code. Let's open a PPU viewer. Let's make sure we don't have a million of these open. We do. And let's look at the sprite viewer. Okay. So, this is better. It actually is now doing what I want it to do. Let's go back to the, but it looks like there's maybe a bug in what I implemented. So it's better, but not perfect. The cloud has a problem. The enemies are partially right. The bullets are loading okay. Let's see what happens. We should start seeing... That was weird. Alright, so there's obviously still some sort of bug with this, but... let's see. The first time through, Y should be at a position that we know is okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to, after we're done, oh, you know what? We don't always generate that code, it looks like, because of where I put that. So let's add the new line at the end there so that I'm happy about the formatting. I think we just missed the one, which is why it was incorrectly drawing pieces of it. All right, so let's remake that. Restart that. Let's go. Okay, we've got that window. Where's our sprite window? Here. There we go. See if the enemies show up correctly. They do, and the bullets show up correctly. And that showed up correctly. And that looks like it was better. Still, it's hard to tell, and I don't know if it's because it's on an emulator. Because I've noticed, yeah, it looks like the flicker is working. I'll have to try it on a TV with the real thing. But it does look like it's at least shifting which ones you can't see because of the order that it's being drawn in. Let's take a look. Or is it? You know, it interestingly, it's just shifting them down. It's not changing the order. So did I... You know, I may have overcomplicated this in a certain sense, thinking about it. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything, but should I have been doing what I was doing but for the entity list and not the sprite DMA, and drawing the entities in a different order, because all I'm doing is shifting it down. Now when it gets to, yeah, I think that's probably going to end up working better. Okay, so should the sprite's position in the sprite viewer be shifting? Yes, that's what I was trying to do. Can you add comments in the same way as adding instructions? Yeah, the comments are just encoded here, so you know I can do something like increment the current DMA location, and that will get generated in the code. But looks like I don't even want to do this. I'm gonna comment this out because I don't know that I want to get rid of it per se yet. But if we go back to the original implementation here, we're always starting with the entities at 0. I'm wondering if what I should be doing is, instead of relying on X to DMA counter, so let's call this, let's just comment this out because I'm probably not going to use it, but entity counter make counter. Let's comment those out. Sorry, entity counter. Okay. All right, so increment entity counter. I'll just load a entity counter. Clear carry. Add carry 1. Add carry 1. And it with 3F. Actually, well, see, now this is a whole different thing, because the entity counter is okay, but that's not so bad. So clear, add carry 1, compare it to entity. What is it? Max entities, I think is what it is. Max entities. Branch not equal to this next label. Load a 0. Store a into entity counter. And then that's our next label. So we're going to tell X to begin at the entity counter. The only problem with that is that it is all right. The only problem with what I was doing there is that that's not actually the value that I want there, but that's okay. Let's leave that for a second. So this load X entity counter, that's 18 total entities. Let's actually, yeah. So that's a counter, but I want X to have the value of the offset that it needs. So what I need to do, I need to load A with the entity counter, and then I need to multiply it by the size of the entity, which that's kind of a pain. Because I want to offset X by the span, by the stride of the memory for each of the entities. So normally you do, you know, entity counter times size of entity, like that, which is a fixed amount, and the compiler gives you that value. So let's be our own compiler. I think I said it's 9 bytes. Is what I recall. Starting at 100 here. So 1, 2, 3, like that. It's 9 bytes, 0 to 8. Yeah, that looks right. So I need to multiply by 9. So to do that, I need to multiply by 8 and then add the size of, or multiply by 8 and then add 1. Is that right? No. Oh, and then add it to itself one time. Right, I need to do ASL, it's 2, 4, 8. and then clear carry, add carry entity counter. Right, so this will give us times 8, and then just to carry that out to prove to myself that I'm not losing it here as I get more and more tired. If the entity counter is at 1, and we know it's 9 bytes, we're multiplying by 8 plus 1, and we get 9. So then if we have 2 as our entity counter, it's 2 times 8 is 16 plus 2, and that gives us 18, which is 9 times 2. And for 3, we have 3 times 8, which is 24, plus 3 is 27. 27 times 3, 9 times 3 is 27, so that looks good. So that's fine. So that's the value of x rather. And then, so that's our starting point for x, so that we don't just start at the beginning every time. Actually, I want to rename this. And the start counter. I need to have something that does counting also, but this is different than that. And I'll tell you why in a second. So that's good. Now, when we come into here, we want to load A with 0 and store A into entity counter. All right, so now we're taking X and we're doing what we're doing with it. We're getting the entity type, and then once we're done with it, we transfer X to A and check to see if we are at the maximum size of the buffer, but that's not what we want to do anymore. What we want to do is we want to increment entity counter, and then we want to load that into A, and then we want to, we still want to do, maybe, I'm not sure if we still want to do that. We want to compare that to max entities, and then branch if equal to done sprites, done sprite, otherwise we're going to jump to draw entities. So that covers the loop where we're looping through and saying, okay, we've got, certain number of entities we want to draw. And what we're doing is we're shuffling around the order so that they're going to, again, shift through the hardware sprites, but also change the order in which they appear to make that flicker work properly. Now, the other thing we need to do is right now we're just incrementing the size of entity by, the X register by the size of entity, which we do want to do, but we want to also compare it to that total entity size, because if it is more, if it's equal, then we want to start back at 0 for X, right? So we're going to compare it, branch if not equal to this check here. Otherwise, we're going to load a 0. Well, we're going to load X 0. Yeah, we can do that. So transfer A to X here, so that X already has the right value if we didn't get to the size of total entities. So transfer X to A, add the size of an entity, transfer it into X so that we have it where it needs to be, compare it to the max size of the buffer. If If we haven't hit the max size of the buffer, then just continue on to checking if we've finished processing all the entities. Otherwise, if we did hit the maximum size of the buffer, go back to the beginning, and then increment the entity counter, and if we hit our max number of entities, then we're done. Otherwise, go back to drawing. That looks correct-ish. We need to change... Oh, is it still... Drat. Okay. I guess I should have done this in the... asset tool, but I was trying to just get it implemented. Alright, so we'll do that here. So that is the same, that's the same. Transfer A to X, compare. I guess it doesn't matter if we compare X or compare A. Branch if equal, so let's change this. Branch not equal to the next label. And then we're going to load X with 0. And then this is our label if we're skipping. And then, so that's that code. That's done. And then what we want to do is this code here. And just get that formatted up here. Okay, so that generates that code now that checks that. And I assume that will be good. So let's export that. We'll replace that code and transfer X to A, clear carry, add the size of the entity, transfer A to X, compare X to total entities. This is wrong, but we can live with that for a minute. Branch if not equal to that, because we don't need to reset the counter, increment entity counter, load A entity counter, compare to max entities, branch if equal to done sprite, otherwise go to draw entities. Did I get rid of that label for done sprite? I may have. I assume that that's going to fail when I go to make it because it won't know what done sprite is. Yep, that doesn't know. Okay, that's easy enough. Done sprite. We'll keep that manually in there for now. Should be interesting to see what it does, to say the least. Cool. That's not at all what it's supposed to do. And this is how that goes sometimes. I'm assuming it's not messing, but let's confirm that. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay. The other... Oh, I think I know what the other problem is. The code that's doing this call, is that not... it's not resetting entity counter every time. Load Y, load A, entity start. So let's do this. Load, because the counter needs to be reset every time. Load Y. No, load A. Store A and the counter. I did forget about that. So let's see if that's all that was wrong. I would find it hard to believe that that's causing that behavior, but you never know. Nope. Okay. So let's walk through this. Load A, 0, stored an entity counter. Entity start should start at 0, and then we shift it by 8, and then we add itself to it, and then we transfer A to X, and then we load Y with 0. And then we load entity start again, and we clear our carry and add carry, and then we compare it to max entities, and then if it's not equal, we... Oh, that is no good. Where is the label? That could very well be doing it. Okay, branch of not equal, load A, 0, stored in entity start, otherwise go to that. A missing label will do it. And that would explain why it had this weird, that one, no reference to unnamed label go away without any actual change. So we were just jumping to random code. There we go. All right, so that's at least looking right. Now we're still drawing. We're still drawing in order. But at least it's not broken. Okay. After all that, store A entity counter, entity start. Transfer A to X. Am I reinitializing X somewhere that I shouldn't be? No. Transfer X to A, clear carry, size of, transfer A to X. I mean, it shouldn't be 0 every time. So, is it just not incrementing it properly? Oh, yeah. There you go. I'm not actually incrementing it. I am incrementing it one time, and then I'm incrementing it and then not storing that change to the increment. Because I am just about done here. So it does look like it is shifting hardware positions. Yeah, things are rotating around. So that's what I was hoping to see. So although the actual positions of the groups of tiles are not going to be different, yeah, that's looking more like what I was expecting to see. So your basic ship tiles, for example, will not be separate because it's not shifting it at that level, but you can see there is flicker on the bullets there that they're firing, because it is shifting the entities around. So it's a little bit chunkier than maybe we could do in theory, but it's going to get the job done as it shifts things around within the number of sprites it needs. So that's the difference. It's not shifting all of the... Before we were shifting all of the things all over the hardware sprites, and instead now we're shifting... I wonder if we slow down the emulation if you can see it better. We're shifting the individual entities into different sprites around, kind of looping around, but within only the number of sprites we actually need. You see how things are changing order? The ship is shifting down. Now the whole ship shifts back up, right? So we're not doing it at an individual tile level, but that's okay. And then you do actually see the flicker happening when you're looking at it slow as partial updates to the sprites. So if we go back to normal speed there, you'll see that they're kind of flickering in and out of existence, which is cool. That's what we wanted to do, because that means they'll draw in different orders, in different order on the screen, and get updated differently, and that all still works. Okay. Whew. That was a little bit more intense than I expected. But the cool thing is that now we have the enemies shooting, although it's not much of a threat at the moment because the bullets don't do anything to our player. But we'll fix that in the next stream. But this is all kind of proving out ideas, right? Like, this is all just trying to come up with ideas for how these enemies are going to be able to attack and what code structure needs to be in place to support it, so that the game is playable. And we will, work more on the full design and make sure that we've got things kind of in hand properly for when we move forward with some more intricate design work. So with that said, as always, thank you for watching. If you'd like to reach me, I'm on Twitter at Clairvis. I'm also on Nintendo Age as Zelius. There are a whole bunch of other really smart, awesome people on Nintendo Age. You should definitely come say hi in the forums, in Discord, in the brewery section. I also post the videos to YouTube. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment on the video and ask your question. MDTA UK, thanks for joining the stream. I'm glad it was interesting. And yeah, and I'll see you Monday for some more programming stuff and more design stuff. And yeah, take care. Have a good night. Have a good weekend.